This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Brian Tripp, Ryan Hickey with you here. Tripp, we have made it. A long and sometimes grueling regular season. 12 games in the books, conference championship in the books. We now know the 12-team college football playoff. We know who the Big Ten champion is. We know who's participating in the bowl games. You were there in Indy live in the scene for what was an instant classic. I thought one of the best Big Ten championship games we have seen in the conference's history. So we got a lot to break down here. Before I ask you how your weekend was, I just want to say, as a Mets fan, my weekend was pretty good. Thanks for asking.
I knew you were going to start with that. Living in New York City, everyone there is on a big high. And hey, it's not your money, right? That's the most important thing.
Thanks. It was my money. Juan Soto, let's just say, may have to take up a second job.
So many people are talking going into college football's championship weekend about what is the value of a conference championship game? How will the College Football Playoff Committee evaluate it? And then also, what will the atmospheres be like at these games? And I'll tell you, I didn't see very many empty seats at Lucas Oil Stadium. It's probably 70% Penn State fans, and doing it on late notice. It's an 8-hour drive from Happy Valley, not close to Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, New York City. But talk about, you mentioned elite game. I don't want to get into the playoff rankings here in a minute, but my weekend, that was an unbelievable atmosphere. And my biggest takeaway, and it kind of ties all of it together, is the committee yesterday did not devalue and ruin college football because they did not devalue a conference championship game. They did not penalize the teams that lost in the conference championship game and still had a better regular season than who they were seated above going into conference championship weekend. And also, the committee still proves that they value the regular season, because as we dive into this whole discussion, and I'll talk more about the game, but the biggest thing that I took away yesterday is that we hear all this debate about who belongs in a playoff and who doesn't. And it got me thinking, well, what is actually the standard for a playoff team? Yeah, we want the 12 best teams to be there at the end of the year. But it's the 12 teams that deserve an opportunity to play for a national championship. So there is no doubt to me that the SEC and the Big Ten are the best two conferences in college football. No one is going to argue that. But if you are not among the 3 or 4 best teams in your conference, you don't really have any ground to stand on for why you deserve an opportunity to compete for a national championship. So we should be giving a de facto regular season champion of the ACC in SMU the opportunity to still play in a playoff because they're one of the 2 best teams this year out of the SEC or out of the ACC. If you're Alabama and you've lost to Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Oklahoma, if you're Ole Miss and you've lost to Kentucky, LSU, and Florida, any other year in the history of college football, that doesn't earn you an opportunity to compete for a national championship. While I don't doubt on paper your team has equal or more talent than some of the teams that are in the field, what you have done, it's not the best 12 teams on paper. It's the 12 teams that deserve an opportunity to play for a national championship. Georgia, they had hiccups during the regular season. Even if Georgia loses to Texas, they deserve to play for a national championship because you look at their resume coupled with their talent. Indiana, yeah, they lost 1 game. You may say, hey, they're not talented enough to hang with the big boys. But what they did during the regular season, you can't definitively say that. And I love that the College Football Playoff Committee kept intact some of the tradition and history of college football when determining who gets to compete for a national championship. I didn't anticipate going on a long rant here to start the podcast today, but I don't think anyone's really discussed it in that light. It's the 12 teams that deserve to compete for a national championship. That's what the committee did. And to me, thank goodness, because it all comes back to how unbelievable it was in Indianapolis on Saturday and what it meant and the emotion of Oregon, the emotion of Penn State. And I'm so glad that we can still have more nights like we had on Saturday night in college football.
That was really well said. The two things I would add just in this, right? The first year, the 12-team playoff, when you put so much weight on a conference championship where the top 4 conference champions have a bye, right? Mm-hmm. You can't then turn around and say, well, we're going to punish you and drop you out because you lost yours in the case of SMU, or even in the case of, because there's a discussion late Saturday, early Sunday, well, how far will Penn State fall? Should Notre Dame be above Penn State? Should Notre Dame be above Texas for losing our conference championship game, both in 1-possession games in the case of the SEC, right, going overtime? And the committee, I think, did the right thing in saying, no, like, we put so much weight because of the bye here that if you lose a close game like both Penn State and Texas did, then we're going to still keep you above Notre Dame, who, because they're not in conference, right, can't compete and have that extra data point the way those other 2 teams could. So I agree with you there, first and foremost. And I think, like, every year, I think the criteria change, right? Because every year college football is different. I think the overarching theme this season, because there's only one elite team, and that's Oregon, it's Oregon and everybody else, is when you talk about taking care of business, I think you have to reward the teams that in the regular season took care of business. In the cases of SMU, Indiana, Penn State, do they have multiple marquee wins, top 10 wins in the resume? They do not. But unlike Alabama, unlike Ole Miss, unlike some other teams, those teams took care of business. They beat the teams they were supposed to beat. And in a year where there are so many upsets, so much parity, you can't just turn a blind eye to teams that, sure, they lost in the case of Penn State to their 2 biggest games in Ohio State and Oregon, both close games. But you can't sit there and punish them and say, oh, they're not very good when they beat everyone they're supposed to beat. You're looking at an Alabama team losing to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. Miami team losing to Syracuse and Georgia Tech. Like, you can't do it. And so I'm glad the committee in this first year, we didn't really know what they're going to value, how much weight they're going to put in, the quote unquote brand bias they were going to use. I think they nailed it. I think they absolutely nailed it.
But the one argument I can agree with is that the team should be seeded. And I don't mind your conference champions and your group of 5 getting a berth in the playoff, but the seed should be based on the rankings, because you do create, and we'll pull the bracket up, you do create an uneven bracket. By now, right, we're recording this on Monday at 11:23 a.m. Eastern. I think all of America have this bracket memorized. It's 12th seeded Clemson against 5th seeded Texas. The winner gets Arizona State, and then Tennessee and Ohio State. The winner gets Oregon in the top half of the bracket. So right now, right, and we've discussed this leading in, if you're the 5 seed Texas or 6 seeded Penn State hosting 11th seeded SMU, the winner gets number 3, the 3rd seed Boise State, which is the 9th ranked team in the country in the Fiesta Bowl, and then 10 Indiana against 7 Notre Dame and South Bend, and the winner gets number 2 Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. But if you're sitting in the 5 or 6 spot, as Texas and Penn State are, granted, the 3 and 4 teams in the country, people are looking at them and going, well, they've got a better path than even an Oregon or a Georgia who's 1 or 2. I would debate that and say you're playing a top 15 team. I'd rather play 1 game versus 2 games. The bye is a huge advantage. Getting the rest, having an extra week to prepare for those opponents. So I don't know that I really buy that notion entirely. I don't know that I buy it entirely. But I do think there is a lot of merit to seeding 1 through 12, assuming that the automatic qualifiers still get a berth among that 1 through 12.
That or reseed to where, like, Oregon, let's just say if Clemson pulls off an upset over Texas, well, instead of Oregon playing, as you see that in the small numbers next to Ohio State or Tennessee, either the 6th or 7th best team in the country, they can play in the case of Clemson, if they can pull off an upset, the 16th best team in the country. I think that is, again, it is a little bit of a punishment for Oregon just because, like, you look at their second round matchups, right, Trip? Let's just say it's chalk. I mean, Oregon has the toughest second round matchup, I would argue, of any team almost. And so it's really tough here for the Ducks to win the Big Ten and then still kind of look at that matchup they have in round number 2. Yeah. I like your idea, either 1 through, I like the automatic qualifiers. I like that conference championships still hold importance. I think they should.
Yeah.
So whether it's just granting them access and then you reseed from there, whether it's, okay, you still get the bye, but once the first round games happen, we're going to reseed to make sure the number 1 team gets at least the most favorable matchup because they've earned it. Whatever that is, I hope we do see a change as early as 2025. I'm going to cut them some slack just because it is a first year, right? So
Yep.
maybe you can't really anticipate, some of the errors until it actually plays out in front of you. But I know there's a new, well, at least right now, after 2025, there's no format set. So maybe we go to 14 teams or whatever.
Yep.
But I think at least in 2025, next year, you got to at least change something with this format.
No, I agree with you. I wouldn't expand it. I don't think you can look at teams 13, 14, 15, 16. They're on the outside looking in and say, going back to my argument right at the beginning, do they deserve a shot to play for the national championship? Ultimately, no. But if you want to really reward the teams that had the best regular season, regardless of conference, then you seed it 1 through 12. Man, we hit the ground. We hit the ground running. I didn't think we'd jump in quite like that.
I'm fired up. Like, it's nice because now we finally have answers. We've speculated. We thought this is what should happen. Like, there's like a new life, new energy when you talk, okay, this is what actually is happening. You look at first round matchups, you see plans already being made for some home games. Like, oh boy, like this is real. And Trip, we're less than 2 weeks away already. It feels like it's so far in the future. We're close.
Yeah, I like it too because you can look ahead at a 15-day forecast and kind of get an idea of what the weather's going to be in Columbus, in a South Bend, in a state college for these playoff games. That's the beauty of it. You have teams traveling. In the case of Tennessee going to Ohio State and a team SMU going to Penn State, you have them leaving Tennessee going to Columbus. This is what it's all about. You have teams, whether it's a team from the North going south to play in a hostile SEC environment where they never really get an opportunity to play. And that's probably a discussion that we'll also have on the podcast, is the value of scheduling non-conference opponents. But this is what you want. You want teams to go and play in create these matchups that we wouldn't otherwise have in a college football playoff. And we're certainly never going to get, because in the day and age of a 9-game conference schedule, especially in a conference like the Big Ten, why would you go and schedule a super challenging non-conference opponent? And then, you have the SEC fans yesterday, and this is what I found kind of comical. Well,
sickening.
We're just going to play Mercer 4 times if we're Alabama. You're only playing 8 games in conference. Imagine playing 9 games in conference. That's the biggest difference. Alabama's losses were in conference, and that's why I just don't get that argument. Can I ask you one question? I don't
Sure.
want to take this because I want to get into the Big Ten and the matchups in the bracket. What did you do to watch the selection show yesterday?
I was actually in this exact seat. So you could see over my, left shoulder here. If you're watching YouTube, that black screen is my TV. So it's basically sitting here with bated breath, waiting to go live to react to the reaction or
you're
live
waiting
to the
a while.
rankings. I was waiting a long time. They told us a lot of information we already knew. I'm glad we recapped yesterday because I'm sure everyone watching was definitely not watching what happened on Saturday for sure. We got to rehash the rules. The only entertaining part was at least Kirk Herbstreit going after Booger McFarland and basically calling out his logic there about brand bias. What are we doing?
Yeah, I saw a comparison to the NCAA March Madness selection show. I don't mind the debate, but let the debate occur after the bracket is announced. We've had 14 weeks of a college football season to debate who should get in, who shouldn't get in, how are they going to measure metrics, what are they going to use in terms of quality win versus quality loss, and to subject us to the opinions really that it don't matter, right? Like what matters is what the College Football Playoff Committee ultimately did. To subject us to that for 25 to 30 minutes before the bracket was unveiled, and then to subject it to those sitting at the desk who I don't believe have full clarity or also do not provide an unbiased opinion on their it's not the time and the place. It's not the time and the place. Afterwards, fine. But in that moment, that's not the time and the place to subject America to that.
I agree. I thought it was very sloppy from ESPN. I think they're usually pretty good at what they do. I like the ranking show every Tuesday. I thought that's always pretty good. But this was just a disaster. Speaking of debate, I'm curious your thoughts here because I saw this on social media late Saturday and some early Sunday as well. Did you have a problem with how the Big Ten seeds were ordered? And really forget Oregon. It comes down to two teams, Penn State and Ohio State. I saw a push from a lot of Ohio State fans that were arguing at 11-2 with both teams that Ohio State, because they won the head-to-head, should be ahead of Penn State. Did you have any problem with the Nittany Lions coming in at 6 and Ohio State at 8, despite losing again the head-to-head matchup back in November?
Well, Ohio State fans making that argument should take a closer look back at 2016 when the College Football Playoff Committee left Penn State out of the 4-team college football playoff, despite beating Ohio State and winning a conference championship game. I don't think you can compare the two, though. This year in a 12-team playoff, Penn State went 11-1 during the regular season with its only loss to Ohio State. Now, if Ohio State also went 11-1 or went 10-2 and their only losses were to top 5 or top 10 teams, I think then you might be able to compare them. But Ohio State lost to a 500 Michigan team at home, and they didn't pass the eye test playing the game. So for me, going into the championship game where Ohio State was sitting at home and not playing, you had an 11-1 Penn State team and a 10-2 Ohio State team that had a bad loss on their resume. Penn State did everything right during the regular season except losing a 7-point close one-possession game to Ohio State. So their resumes really weren't comparable. Now, if the Penn State-Oregon game gets lopsided, if it's 28-10 and it continues to trend in that direction, instead of Penn State fighting and playing gutsy, gritty football, then you have a discussion. But because it was a tight back-and-forth game, that to me, even though the result wasn't positive for Penn State, it verified what everyone in that committee thought, because Penn State, to deserve that number 3 ranking that they had going into a conference. And you can't penalize a team for playing, especially if they play a competitive game and lose to a number 1 team.
And also, too, I think what people have to realize here, because it's not just Ohio State, this is, again, Alabama fans, this is all over college football. These weekly rankings, right, they matter. The committee told you in the regular season, all things being equal, 12 games, that Penn State at 3 and Ohio State with 6. Penn State was 3 spots better, even though they lost the head-to-head with having 1 less loss. They were 3 spots better than Ohio State. Remember, when the Buckeyes lost to Michigan, they went from 2 to 6. They dropped 4 spots, losing it as a 21-point favorite at home to, like you said, a 6-5 at the time Michigan team. So think about that logic they applied to the Buckeyes. And then how can you say, watching that Big Ten title game with Penn State going toe-to-toe for 3 quarters, we'll say, after a sloppy first quarter and a half, going toe-to-toe with Oregon for 2.5, 3 quarters, losing by 1 score and a neutral site, how can you say, you know what, yeah, we're going to penalize them for, number 1, playing in an extra game, and then number 2, we're going to drop them essentially the same amount we dropped Ohio State for losing to Michigan? The logic doesn't match up, and that's why I couldn't believe that there's even a debate or a push or a surge or a thought from Buckeye Nation. I understand you won the head-to-head and the records now are equal, but they're really not equal because Penn State played an extra game you didn't, and you, like you said, could not take care of business in a year where taking care of business was really more important than anything else. Forget wins, forget losses. If you beat the teams that you were supposed to beat, the committee rewarded that more than anything. You didn't do it. I don't think it's biased. There's no problem there.
No, I think Ward Manuel actually said it best. The conference championship game provided the committee with an extra data point. Now, you're still evaluated based on your first 12 games and not that extra 13th game. However, in Penn State's case, having only played 1 team that's within the top 20 throughout the course of the year, Illinois, a fringe top 20 team, they're in the top 25, Minnesota, a pretty good team. You really didn't have that data point besides the Ohio State game in Happy Valley, how they compared to other teams that are considered the top 5, top 10 teams in the country. It gave them an extra data point that just verified what they thought about Penn State, right? I think unless a conference championship game is lopsided in one way or another, and Penn State's a pretty good example. Texas is a pretty good example. If Texas got rolled by Georgia again, your 2 data points for Texas against top competition aren't good. No. They're not good. But they played a super competitive game against a team that many consider to be, if not the best, one of the top 2-3 teams in the country. So I think Texas and Penn State were in very similar spots. And because of their performance, even though they're on the losing end, if you're looking for who can win a national team, who deserves a shot to play for a national championship, those two teams absolutely are deserving because they went toe-to-toe. Like if your final four teams left this year are Penn State, Georgia, Texas, and Oregon, everyone's saying, all right, those are probably the four best teams in college football.
I agree. Let's actually talk about the Big Ten tonight. We still got a lot to go here. We'll circle back on the college football playoff. We also got bowl games as well for the other non-playoff teams that we'll dive into. Some big hires in the conference. We got a loaded pot here for you. So don't worry. We got still so much to go here. But like you said, Trip, you're on the sidelines for that game. Watching on TV, I thought for sure, again, I thought that was the best atmosphere we saw of all championship weekend. The broadcasters, Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson kept talking about how these two teams, like you could argue, quote unquote, maybe nothing on the line. They're both in the playoff. Now you're playing for seeding. They were playing like there was a championship on the line here, Trip. And Oregon, first year in the Big Ten, go 13-0, win a conference title for the first time since 2020, and just continue to impress. And to me, just continue to look like they are by far and away the best team in the country and by far and away the favorite to win the national title.
I thought on the field with the two fan bases there, it felt like there are games, and I said it right at the top of the broadcast, it just felt like a big game. It didn't have that, oh, this is meaningless. Oh, we're in the college football. It didn't have that. It had, these are two Titans. This is number 1 versus number 3. And then watching it play out where it was punch, counterpunch, punch, counterpunch. It felt like a heavyweight fight. My biggest takeaway, and you're right, Oregon's the top team in the country. Dylan Gabriel, I thought, was outstanding. His ability to get the ball out through traffic, even being undersized, but they do a nice job of keeping his sight line open, particularly as he climbs that pocket, middle of the field. Those guards, they push out, so he has room to throw that football. Number 1, Oregon is the best team in the country, deservedly the number 1 seed, but how they got there in this game is not, I don't think anyone expected it to play out in a shootout. 45-37. You had two really, really, really good defensive fronts, and they were essentially negated in this game. I think Penn State fans will argue, well, Carter's being held. I think he's been held throughout the course of the season, but ultimately the officials didn't decide the game. Like Penn State could have used a call or two to swing it their way to overcome some of the mistakes that they ultimately made in the game. But how it played out was surprising. It being a heavyweight fight, not surprising to me. But 45-37, you start looking through the box score, it's like these two teams with good defenses, good lines. How did this just become a shootout?
It became a shootout. I think in part because we talked about on Thursday, right? The keys, at least from Penn State's perspective, because we talked about how great Oregon is. How does Penn State make this game? How can they win? And you talked about the Penn State defensive line, especially that front four. Can they generate pressure? Can they get after Gabriel? Can they get him off his spot and cloud his vision? And I couldn't tell you how many times, Trip, Abdul, Carter, Dennis Sutton, a few others as well, were half a second late?
Yep.
If Gabriel. They were an inch, closer, that they're taking him down, deflecting the ball, knocking it away, getting him off his spot, rattling him, maybe forcing him to take the ball and take the sack. His release, and again, we've seen it all season long, but his release, how quick it is, how he's able to stand in there to the last second and just like let it out. You just don't like blink. It's like, the ball's out. And it's 20 yards down the field. It is just, it's truly amazing to watch. He's a total field general out there. You see the experience as a 6-year starter now as well, paying off big time. He's unbelievable. And again, it helps when you have these great receivers. Tez Johnson had himself a day, winning the Big Ten MVP with 11 catches over 180 yards.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Real quick. Everyone's talked about how great Oregon's wide receivers are. How many catches did Oregon's wide receivers have combined in this game? Johnson had 11.
Was it 11? Trayshawn Holden had 1, 2. I'm going to say 13.
13 is correct. Holden had 2. That is it. So it wasn't the receivers. This was, and truly, in a game of this stakes, one of my keys is your best players have to be your best players. Gabriel and Tez Johnson on Oregon's offense were the best players on the field. And they slightly outplayed Aller, Singleton, and Warren when going offense to offense. And slightly outplayed Carter, who's the best player on Penn State's defense. Oregon's best players were the best players in the game. Slightly. It was close, but Oregon's best players were the best players in the game. And it could be as simple as that. Turnovers, penalties, and explosive plays. Oregon made it just enough, and they won the game. That's a credit, again, to Gabriel and Johnson, who was uncoverable.
And two, it's like what they do, Trip, all season long, and especially in this game, they make the play. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like the Chiefs in a way, where whatever play needs to be made late in the game, they make it. Whether it's an interception in this game with just over 2 minutes to go to really seal it away, and then Dylan Gabriel in the run game gets the first down and salt the clock away. Whether it's going back to the Wisconsin game on a 4th down and 9 with the game in the balance, where does Dylan Gabriel go? Fires Terrence Ferguson first and keeps the drive going, eventually leads to a touchdown. Eventually they win that game. Defensively, and we could talk about Will Howard not knowing the clock. Oregon's defense, look, they got to stop. They had to get a stop. They got to stop. They helped kind of put Will Howard in the spin zone there. Like, they have come up clutch all different phases of the game. Dan Lanning, hell, we're going to have fake punt against fake field goal against Wisconsin to help seal the, like, whatever they do, they continue just to, no, it didn't work, but still, they continue to make plays all throughout the roster. And it's just, it's incredible to watch. And that's the true mark of a championship team.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, like, and they ran the ball well enough in this game. James, 87 yards. Whittington had 82 yards. He was really, really impressive for Oregon. This is where, like, what's the Penn State conundrum now out of it? There's no doubt Oregon's the best team in the country. You could see it. But Penn State went toe-to-toe with Oregon. So the most optimistic of Penn State fans are looking at this and saying, oh, we've got a chance. We played well. And, in fact, the most optimistic of Penn State fans may say, we may have been the better team if we didn't take personal foul penalties. If it's called maybe a little bit tighter by the officials, you get a call or two to go your way. You don't have the 2 turnovers. Don't settle for a field goal on your opening drive. Don't settle for a field goal that you missed on your opening drive of the second half. Penn State converts in the red zone, makes a few more plays. They're there. So the most optimistic Penn State fan is, look what our offense just did against Oregon's really good defense. Our defense will figure it out. If not, they're good enough to beat everyone else but Oregon. The most pessimistic of Penn State fans would say, well, how come in a game like this, we are never the team to make the 1 or 2 more plays to win the game? And that is ultimately what Penn State is going to have to answer going into the college football playoff against SMU, against Boise State. And if it could continue, can they finally be the team? They're there. But what can they do to flip the script so they're the team that makes just enough plays to win a game that's tight against a marquee top 5, top 10 opponent?
I want to talk to the pessimistic Penn State fan because, again, after the game, like you said, it's easy to say, another big game loss for James Franklin. And I saw a lot on social media about Penn State and James Franklin's record against top 5 opponents. It's not pretty whatsoever. It did not, help at all. I get there's no moral victories. But while it was a loss to another top 5 team, I think where this loss felt different and where you can truly come out of this game feeling encouraged going to the playoff is how they lost to a great team is different than how they lost to Ohio State and a lot of great teams really up until the Ohio State game in 2017, which I thought was just a great game back and forth. They lost in the shoe. They blew it. But for the most part, really from 2018 to 2024 to that Ohio State game, Penn State lost every big game they played. And for the most part, because they played not to lose. They played conservative. And it felt like we kept talking about some of the conversation was the best players on Penn State's roster didn't get the ball. And what we're talking about after the Ohio State loss, Tyler Warren barely touched the ball. You get you down to the red zone, you don't give them the ball one time down by the goal line, and a goal line stand, which Ohio State ends up winning the game on. This game, I thought Penn State, you could truly see they learned from their previous mistakes. They learned from that Ohio State loss specifically because they made sure Tyler Warren was involved early and often. They made sure Nick Singleton, who got off to a rip-roaring start, was getting the ball. They made sure when they saw Katron Allen having success, they fed him as well. They fed the hot hands. They let Drew Aller, cook and drop back and just make some throws down the field. I thought Penn State, especially offensively, where you could really criticize them because they've been unable to score a ton of points in these big games. I thought this was by far their best performance in a big game, really since 2017 Ohio State. And I thought you saw aggressiveness from them. And I thought there's a confidence there as well, a belief we can win this game that I thought was missing for years in these big games. I get the result at the end of the day did not go their way. And it's the same again, another loss to a top 5 team. I don't know about you, Trip. This to me feels different in the sense that they actually competed. They were not scared. You feel like sometimes Penn State, you could see right away, come out against Ohio State or come out against Michigan, they're intimidated. They're okay, let's try to, not make mistakes. Maybe we'll get the ball bounce our way. It was infuriating early on in the first quarter. Right? We had, 4 personal foul calls against Penn State. They were trying to do too much. They were over pursuing. I'm not excusing that, but at least for me, what I can look back on is at least they were making plays, trying to make a play. Too many times I feel like they, again, they were playing not to lose. The aggressiveness I thought was there for the first time in a big game in a long time. And I really think you can take that going forward. And I think you can really take that as an encouraging point, despite another loss.
And I think I'm very curious if that's just because it was a high scoring offensive shootout, as opposed to one of these defensive 20-13 type games like you had at Beaver Stadium earlier this year. I'll say their ability, this is a team that fights, and they've got pizzazz, they have moxie. And to me, if I'm a Penn State fan, I'm encouraged by that. They have leadership. To me, the turning point of the game for Penn State to get back in it. And look, I think Aller played well and gutsy. His ability to run and pick up and the throw to Harrison Wallace on a 4th and 10, 22-yard touchdown with a guy on his back. Like Aller made 4 to 5 unbelievable plays in the game, but he wasn't perfect. He missed Singleton over the middle when Singleton was interfered with on the bump that wasn't called. He missed Warren over the middle. He missed Warren on an out route. Like, he threw a couple of picks. He wasn't perfect. But to me, it was a great learning experience. This is the biggest game he's ever played in. This is the biggest game they've played in. Oregon's played in conference championship games. Oregon's played in big games where Penn State, their biggest games have been regular season games. After Penn State went 3 and out, after I think the second personal foul penalty was on Venga Ioane on the offensive line, Aller came over to the sideline. He was heated. And he let his offensive line know about it. And they let him know back, like, hey, we got to figure this out. And it wasn't all that civil a discussion. Someone had to step in, pull him aside. And he came out on that next drive and threw what was essentially a pick 6 on one of the very next throws. And I'm like, uh-oh. This is spiraling here. The moment's too much. James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki called plays to get him dialed back in. And they responded. I think facing adversity, knowing in a game like this, you're going to get... My question to James Franklin at halftime was, James, in a game like this, you're going to have to handle adversity and you're going to have to take some punches. What do you tell your team in that locker room going to the second half to be able to handle that? And he goes, punch back. And they did. It was a 2-word answer. And he said, punch back. And they did. And I think that's why Penn State fans feel like the game felt different because of that. And I think ultimately the experience for them playing in that type of game, in that type of atmosphere, where it felt like a college football it felt like a national semifinal in there. Now they have that under their belt because they have not had that experience. Peach Bowl last year, opt-outs. Didn't have that experience. Mm-hmm. Rose Bowl was a different cast of characters. This is the first time this group got that experience. I think that pays dividends for them as they head into the college football playoff.
I agree. I'm with you 1,000,000%. Again, I think this is one of those losses, again, not to be the moral win police, but I think this is kind of one of those things where you can actually get a true confidence builder when you went toe-to-toe with the number. And I think, too, Trip, what helps build it is they made mistakes. Again, some of them was on them. But with all the mistakes, all the penalties, all the missed calls, let's be real here. There were some egregious missed calls, including one. Let's just black and white. They ruled an incompletion. I forget if it was to Omari Evans. I apologize.
Yes,
the receiver was. Clearly caught the ball. Replay did not. That was beyond me. Anyway, flags did not go their way. Turnovers, down 28-10. To still sit there, and we're talking about a one-possession game late where Penn State had the ball with a chance to tie despite everything that did not go their way at the start of the game, and the opponent you're facing, the number one team in the country, who's been by far and away the best team since week number 1 on. I don't know how you can watch that game and say, oh, this is the same old Penn State, or oh, they can't get over the hump. Again, the win column says otherwise, but you, as much confidence, right, as you can gain from losing a game, I think that's what Penn State has. And I think it's crazy to say, I think they have real momentum going at home when SMU comes to town here in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, and as we go back to the college football playoff and look at that bracket again, right? That's the discussion now. Is for Penn State, it's a win-win because they didn't get passed by Notre Dame. So they're the 6th seed, and they will play with a win over SMU. Why is that momentum real? They're going to play Boise State. If they can get by SMU, they'll play Boise State with a chance to go to the national semifinal. Same thing. Texas is going to have to go through Arizona State. Oregon's going to play the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee. Georgia's going to play the winner of Notre Dame, Indiana. That 5 or 6 spot was highly, highly coveted. And you feel like for Penn State, they have a very viable path to the national semifinals. And that's a large part of the discourse for the Big Ten right now is it was a win-win for them. For Oregon, you're in the Rose Bowl. You have a bye. Yeah, you might have perhaps a tougher second round game. Some might say on paper. But the Big Ten, I think the bracket sets up incredibly well for the Big Ten.
I agree. I just want to mention one thing about Oregon. I think they also clearly have a lot of confidence as well. They're able to win a game, which you saw the Ohio State game was pretty high scoring, 32-31. But if you're Dan Lanning, isn't this a coach's dream, right? Where you win a game and there's still so much you can improve upon and get better. I think he'll have those guys ready to play. You get a nice little 3-week break here. And then it's going to be obviously right there, biggest game of the year, but they are clearly battle tested. Speaking of the Big Ten, Trip, I want to ask you this here. When you look at now the bracket, now we finally know the path for each team. What would you say? Let's try to define some success early on of what would constitute a good postseason appearance here. If you're Oregon, is the expectation for you seeing this team so far this year, is it championship or bust?
Yeah, I think they have to make it to the national championship game. It's hard because they've already won a Big Ten championship. They had a 13-0 regular season. Yeah, it would stink to get upset in a national semifinal, but I feel like once you get to the national semifinals, in this era of a 12-team playoff, once you get there, all bets are off. So as much as I want to say, yes, they need to win a national championship to get over the hurdle because they've already accomplished so much. If they could get another signature Rose Bowl win against either Tennessee or Ohio State, I think it's easy to sit here today and say, oh, it's national title or bust. Honestly, I think now for anyone, it's get to that Final Four. And then what happens from there kind of happens. So for Oregon, I think it's easy to say, yes, national title. But I also think that's unfair to define a successful season as that for a team that's already had so much success first year in the Big Ten.
I'll go national title or bust, in part because, again, with so much parity, they're the only team that has been a constant. And they're the only team I think that has gotten better as the year has gone on continuously. And you just to bring up the bracket one more time here, I get it, right? Ohio State or Tennessee, either way is going to pose a big challenge for the Ducks. If you're able to get by that, and let's say Texas takes care of business against Clemson, which I don't know about that game, to be honest with you. And then Arizona State. I mean, when you saw Clemson in some of the biggest games here, it's not like they are world beaters. I mean, you could easily get after Quinn Ewers and rattle him. That is, to me, a very vulnerable Texas team where we could talk about, Ohio State, Tennessee, second matchup is tough for Oregon. The bracket otherwise, though, I think breaks pretty well for them to get to the national title game. And then whether it's a rematch with Penn State, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Notre Dame, right? Probably the 3 teams that they have the highest likelihood of facing in the national title game. They'll be favored in every game. I think with how well they've played, with Dylan Gabriel playing at the top of his game, with Tez Johnson, again, now healthy and looking good. I think his defense will bounce back after what was for them an anomaly of a performance against Penn State. I'm going national title or bust. The Ducks have been that good. And I would be surprised if they can't break through. How about the Nittany Lions, Trip? What would you say would be a successful postseason for them?
I think there's a lot of pressure on them to win at least one game in the college football playoff, kind of get that narrative out of there. But then if they match up against Boise State, they're also going to be favored there. It's been a good year. You reached the Big Ten championship. I think they'd love to have some hardware with this group in particular. This is a special class for them with Aller and Carter and Singleton. I'm torn. They have to win the first game. They have to win the home game. They have to. There's pressure on James Franklin and Penn State in that game. I do think anything less than a Final Four because of how the bracket sets up, you feel pretty disappointed afterwards.
I think it's Final Four or bust. Again, just to pull it up here, look at it, right? Do they have, I mean, of the teams playing in the first round, they have the best path, right? I think for me, I'd rather play SMU and Boise State than even Clemson and Arizona State. So when we look at Texas getting the 5 seed, I think they have the most favorable first round teams playing on the opening weekend path to get to the Final Four. I think it really is Final Four or bust. I'm with you got to beat SMU bare minimum. They'll be 10-point, maybe 2 touchdown favorites against Boise State, who may have the reigning Heisman Trophy champion at that point. We'll find out soon here in Asher Genty, who's a load, an absolute workhorse. But Penn State has talent. They got speed defensively. Would you say, so I think it's Final Four or bust. Do you think they have the most pressure of any team, at least in terms of getting to the Final Four?
Yeah, that's tough to say because I think the next team we're going to discuss is Ohio State, and the only way to save their season is to get to a Final Four. I think going into this, you would say Ohio State has to be a national champion or in the national championship game. But if Ohio State bounces back, beats Tennessee at home, then avenges their loss against Oregon in the Rose Bowl, that's 2 pretty good wins at the end of your year against top 10 teams from the 2 biggest leagues. So I think if you look at it big picture, right, and don't look at who they play in their path, you would say Ohio State, to define a successful season, is to get to the national championship. Because of how they would get to the college football playoff semifinals, I think Ohio State has to win twice in this to define it as a successful season. I think Ohio State's got the most pressure because this is the team that was supposed to compete for a national championship from the beginning of the year, had the disappointing, devastating loss to Michigan. And Ryan Day, if they do not beat Tennessee, that seat is extremely hot.
It is. I still think Penn State, just because the path I think is easier. Like it is, if you're Ohio State, again, I get where the expectations are. You lose to Tennessee, you lose to Oregon. In a vacuum, it's not as bad as losing to SMU or Boise State. But with that, like if you're Ohio State, I think it's national title or national championship game appearance, I should say, or bust. In part because if you can beat Tennessee, if you're able to avenge your loss to Oregon and win that game, you look at who they'll face most likely, either Texas or Arizona State. Let's just call it Texas, right? They'll be favored. And again, Texas has not played that well this season, to where I think if you're a Buckeyes fan and you're coming off now back-to-back wins over Tennessee and Oregon, you're feeling invincible. And so if you lose to Georgia, let's say in the national title game, you lose to Penn State, you lose to Notre Dame, I think it's a little easier to swallow than, let's say, losing to a Texas team that really has kind of been ho-hum and not, they have all this talent, but they've never played up to it so far, with Quinn Ewers kind of struggling. I think it's national championship game appearance or bust for the Buckeyes. And it's, how about what Kirk Herbstreit said too as an alum? And when the bracket was revealed, Trip, and you had Ohio State as the last team in terms of getting a first round home game, he says, oh boy, maybe Ohio State wishes they were on the road. I mean, do you expect, what do you expect crowd wise? Do you expect like a hostile carryover crowd that's frustrated, or like at least to start the game? I mean, I'm anticipating still a pretty good home atmosphere.
Yeah, it'll be an unbelievable atmosphere until things go south, if they go south. So you just got to hope they don't go south. It's going to be like playing in Philly, honestly. I mean, the Eagles have 2 losses and we're getting booed off the field yesterday. So
after the Super Bowl, they get booed off the field at halftime of the opening game of the year the next year. Never forget that. That's a good comp. That's a good comp. I think you're right.
Don't play like crap.
I like that. Which we've seen Ryan Day when it kind of is like, okay, don't screw it up. Now it's one team. That's when you kind of see things start to go haywire here as well. How about Indiana, Trip? They draw Notre Dame, right? They're the 10 seed here, staying in state, going up north here to South Bend. What would you say would be a good postseason appearance for them here?
Really tough matchup for them too. Really tough matchup for them. Yeah. They just can't get blown out to prove they belong. They got blown out by Ohio State. They just have to look like they belong in this game. Play competitive. Unbelievable, historic season for them. Really tough matchup, tough draw. It's Indiana football. It's been a historic season. So I think it's been an overwhelming success, but you still want to prove to yourself, since some of the others out there, that, okay, even if we can't beat the big boys, we're not there yet, we can play with them. So I think they need to be competitive in the game.
Spread is right now 7.5. I think they keep it within 10. That's a win. Like if you're back, if you're more competitive than you were against Ohio State on the road, I think that game will serve them well going to South Bend here. You could be physical, stop the run. We're sitting there middle of the third quarter, early fourth. And it's like, this is anyone's game. I think if you're Indiana, that's a massive win. That's a massive win for you here. I think that would absolutely constitute a successful season.
Yeah, diving into it and talking about the matchups a little bit, just really, really quick, is Indiana. they were out physicaled by Ohio State, even with Ohio State having that depleted offensive line. Notre Dame is as talented up front as anybody. Are they going to be able to stop Riley Leonard, Love, and that run game for Notre Dame? If Notre Dame can control the line of scrimmage like Ohio State did against Indiana, Indiana's in big trouble. This is a big bounce back game for Kamara. It's a big one for Fisher, their linebacker. They're going to have their hands full, and then flip it to the other side. I think everyone's kind of thought of Indiana as this pass team, and I still think they're a pass-first offense, but they've been able to run the ball effectively and efficiently too. But they're going to have to be able to throw the ball some in this game, you figure. Will they be able to against Notre Dame's elite pass defense? And because of Notre Dame's ability to run the ball and ability to stop the pass, I do not like this matchup for Indiana. Hopefully the experience of playing in Columbus in the shoe helps them here, because they have to play from ahead and they cannot afford to play catch up, because I don't think they're built to do it against a Notre Dame team that will just grind it out and has played as well as anyone in the country the last couple of weeks.
No, you're right about that. And look, you saw USC the last game of the year. They had success, right? Throwing the ball, also had success running the ball. So Notre Dame defense, while the stats look good, it's not impenetrable. And I think if you're Indiana, biggest thing is, right, don't beat themselves. Part of the reason, most of the reason why they lost that game is turnovers, sacks,
special
under
teams.
pressure. Right, yeah. If you clean up and just play a clean game from your perspective, I think you'll be in this game here, regardless of what Notre Dame does. How about the shoe trip here? Ohio State, Tennessee. It is kind of interesting. Both teams come in kind of similarly in the sense of they have great defenses. They want to rely on the run game. Now, Ohio State's run game is kind of taken back a little bit because of the offensive line questions and injuries. And two quarterbacks, I don't want to – Will Howard, I think, again, played better than expectations. But Nico Iamaleava for Tennessee, I thought he'd have a big season. I thought he'd really bring some balance to that offense. And it's really just been the run game. That's really it. There's not much of a pass threat whatsoever from this Tennessee team so far this year.
I'm struggling all year to say Uyunglele, and then you just roll that one out right off the tip of your tongue. Say it again.
Nico Iamaleava. A lot of practice.
That's good. I think it's a bad matchup for Ohio State. Tennessee has an elite defensive line. James Pierce Jr. is a first-round draft pick. They're good at defensive tackle and stopping the run. And Ohio State's offensive line. Now, here's the benefit. Ryan Day's had an extra week to prepare and try to get that offensive line up to speed with McLaughlin, the center, out after not playing well against Michigan. They have to look at this as we didn't move it against Michigan's defense. Tennessee's really good in their front seven. So what are we going to do different? What are we going to do different than we did when we were at home against Michigan? And ultimately, it's not a good matchup for them unless they solve that problem. I'll say this, though. Tennessee's offense has really struggled in the red zone this year. Ohio State's red zone defense is outstanding. It is, as you said, it is two teams. It is a matchup, like a matchup here.
Reason why it's in prime time, right? That is the one that you circle the most for on that opening weekend. You get most excited for. Obviously, Oregon, right, not playing in their first matchup. They will, though, play at the Rose Bowl, 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock local on New Year's Day. Of course, they do await the winner of that game, Tennessee, Ohio State. So I'm sure if you're a Duck fan, right, you're looking for a bruising, grinded out battle here. Both teams kind of really just deliver some big time hits and wear each other down as they get ready for that game. And then obviously the one you'll be at, the one I think I'll be at as well. Yeah.
Well, rentals, there's 2 spare rooms right over here outside the store.
You can make a whole lot of supplemental income.
Fee.
Graduation weekend,
SMU.
Playoff game.
Noon kick, too.
Were you surprised by that?
No.
Oh, I was maybe I'm just a sucker. I was shocked. You know what really fast, what bothered me? This is relevant for the Big Ten. You had ESPN, right, who owns the playoff, all year long, taunting Penn State fans, taunting Ohio State fans, taunting Big Ten fans about the noon kickoffs. Oh, you play your best games at noon. The fans are upset. They go to Penn State when Ohio State's there, and they're taunting about big noon kickoff, trying to start all these chants, Fox sucks. And you throw the game. I get it. Penn State, SMU is not the best game. I understand that. I just feel like you can't pull all that nonsense of taking shots, consistent shots at Fox, and then just do what they just did.
But they put Ohio State at night. So, they have just as much of a gripe. 5 of 6 on Big Noon, and they posted a graphic yesterday where they were breaking the handcuffs free from noon kickoffs, and someone made them take it down.
I did not see that. That's great. That's good.
Yeah. But if you look at the matchups in terms of rating, as much as, I know we have a heavy Penn State audience on this podcast, Notre Dame and Ohio State outrate Penn State. So
they do.
Notre Dame's getting the night game on Friday. Ohio State's getting the night game on Saturday. They're playing an SEC team. Notre Dame's at home. ESPN, because of the NBC contract, doesn't get to broadcast in South Bend at Notre Dame Stadium. And you got Clemson, which, love them or hate them, Clemson's been one of the teams that has been a preeminent team in this playoff era, taking on the second best team in the SEC in a 4:00 window. Like, when you look at the matchups, now, if it's Penn State, Alabama, it might be a different story. But Penn State, SMU ratings, they're going to be stuck in that noon window. The second you saw SMU pop up on that screen, you knew that was a noon game. As an aside, by the way, this is Penn State's run game against the SMU defense that I'm looking forward to seeing. Penn State 4 times, 200-plus rushing yards since their loss to Ohio State. Meanwhile, SMU holding opponents to 93 rush yards per game. So is Penn State able to run the ball with Singleton, with Allen, with Drew Aller, the way that they did against Oregon in the Big Ten championship, and as they did so many times down the stretch, with the exception of the Minnesota game? If they can't, Ken Aller, in chilly temperatures, throw the ball around to Warren, to his other guys? Ultimately, that may not matter, because I think Penn State up front on the offensive and defensive line is playing at an extremely, extremely high level right now. I don't think SMU has the talent and size and depth in the trenches. I think Penn State, because of the trenches, wins it. But Jennings, as a dual threat quarterback for SMU, creates a little extra conflict for that defense, same way Gabriel did for Oregon. And Penn State's going to have a bounce back defensive performance against another quarterback who can use his legs effectively. He's their second leading rusher. And that's, Penn State did a good job early against Green from West Virginia. I think they did okay against Howard, but he made some big plays. Same thing. Gabriel, they did okay, but he made enough big plays with his legs. That has been kind of the kryptonite for this Penn State defense a little bit. So that's a big element of this game.
It will be. It absolutely will be here. Very excited to break that down. Obviously, we'll get more in detail here in the next 2 weeks as you do get set for those games, starting with Indiana and Notre Dame on Friday night, the 20th.
Yeah, don't forget to tell our audience what we have coming up tomorrow, too.
Very excited. Yogi Roth hopping on the pod. Tremendous Big Ten analyst. Was with the Pac-12, so he knows Oregon very well. He'll give us his perspective on the Big Ten. He was with Indiana at their facility on Sunday when they were announced to make the playoffs. So he's been a great addition to the Big Ten network, a tremendous football mind. He'll be on the pod tomorrow to break down really not just the playoff games here, but really everything going on in the conference as well. So make sure, again, you're subscribed, whether it's on YouTube or wherever you do get your pod, still enrolled. A very exciting interview we got coming for you here with Yogi Roth. That'll be, I think, really informational and a lot of fun. One thing I'm sure we'll throw by him, Trip, here is Purdue getting a new head coach, making it official. They have come to agreement with Barry Odom of UNLV to be their next head coach. We talked about this a little bit when they fired Ryan Walters. What does Purdue need to look for? What do they need to prioritize here and find the next head coach? I thought it was an experienced head coach on the offensive side of the football. And I think when it comes to experience, someone who knows how to win, has built programs up, they, I think, got a home run. They absolutely got a home run in Odom, who, you look at what he did at UNLV in just the 2 years he was there. They went to back-to-back Mountain West title games. They won 9 games in each of the 2 years. And that's important because in the 47 years of UNLV football, they have never had back-to-back 9-win seasons. He did that. He built some consistency there out in the desert. If you're Purdue, I mean, I think you look at the interest you could have gotten, the hires you could have made, this feels as good as it could have possibly gone.
Yeah, someone's going to look at this and say, well, he's only 500 at Missouri. But to your point, I think the experience of coaching in Power 5 football is really important here, where you get a young assistant. There's a lot to navigate at Purdue. There's a lot to navigate administratively there. What can you do to advocate for your football program at a basketball school? How do you manage a staff and get support for a staff that it's going to take to manage a $22 million salary cap? What are you going to do? How can you elevate the Purdue? And I think you need a guy who's been around the block before. At Indiana, it worked with Curt Cignetti. He was a winner who's an older, experienced head coach. I think at a school like this, it's not that rising star where he can learn on the job because there's foundational pieces around him and resources. Here, you have to advocate for your resources. You have to maximize what you have, and having head coach experience like a Barry Odom really, really pays off I like this hire. I like this hire a lot for Purdue. I think it's a good fit.
And just to go back to what you said about the detractors, he was 25 and 25
Mhm.
Mizzou. What Purdue fan right now with where this program is would turn their nose up at 6-6 every year, right? You just went 0-9 in the cup, and you lost to every FBS team you played. You lost 11 in a row.
Mhm.
Yeah, you will absolutely take 6-6, no doubt about it here. But I think you can see, the path for even, more contention consistently with what Odom's able to do. Again, UNLV was a top 20 team before they lost and 1 quarter away from going to the college football playoff. This is I think as good of a hire as you could have gotten for Purdue. Speaking of hires, Wisconsin made an official trip. They have made an offensive coordinator hire. That was something we were kind of monitoring here very closely as they moved away from Phil Longo and were trying to undergo a identity change, I guess if you could say, going back to their original identity, and hiring Kansas offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes, who, when you look at what he's able to do at Kansas in his 1 year replacing Andy Kotelnicki, Kansas still was able to run the ball. They're one of the best rushing teams in college football. And it looks like what you were talking about now for weeks about going back to what won them games consistently, what got them to 9, 10, 11 wins every year for Wisconsin was running the football. It looks, Trip, like they're going to maybe add some more explosiveness and try to maybe do it a little differently, but they're going back to their roots as that ground and pound team first that we've come to know and love Wisconsin for years and decades.
Yeah, I think it's a good hire as well. I think you look at what Grimes has done and Kotelnicki maximizing what they have at Kansas, and it's finding a scheme that works for you with the talent. And that's what they were able to do at Kansas. You need an offensive coordinator who's able to adapt to your talent. I think Grimes can do that. And I like that Luke Fickell is going back to run first roots here for Wisconsin. I've advocated for that for a couple of weeks here.
And two, I think the last thing to say that I think will help modernize this offense is, you want to run the ball, right? How you run the ball is interesting. You're going to try to get more on the edge with some speed guys here, but also what Grimes and Kansas was able to do was not only did they run the ball really well, they're 12th in the country in terms of rushing yards per game. They then took deep shots. And you look at Jalen Daniels, Kansas's quarterback last year. He averaged, according to PFF, let me pull it up here, 24% of his passes, almost a quarter of his pass attempts this year went for 20 air yards or more. So he's pushing the ball down the field a ton. That was the 4th most by any quarterback in the FBS. So they're running the ball, right? But then off the run, they're trying to beat you deep. That's something that we haven't really seen from Wisconsin in past years with all their quarterbacks really not named Russell Wilson. There was not a deep element at all. Really, the quarterback was a game manager. If you can get back to running and now modernize that by having a quarterback that can off the run, off play action, bury it deep and hit a few deep shots a game, I think that's huge for Wisconsin's offense. You look at it in terms of their lack of explosiveness this year. Wisconsin, in terms of yards of 10 plays or more, or plays of 10 yards or more, they're 119th in the country. And in terms of plays of 20 yards or more, they're 129th. So There's a lot of struggles, right? Big explosive plays were one of the biggest ones this season that you hope Jeff Grimes can come in here and fix. Let's hear Trip. Let's wrap up the pod with this, right? Because it's not just about the playoff here for the Big Ten. You have 8 other teams making bowl games here as well. And how about this? This is, I think, a good year for the conference, Trip. You got 12 out of 18 teams playing postseason football of some kind. I think it's a good, healthy number here for a conference that I think, again, was one of the most competitive this year.
Yeah, I think it was a great year for the Big Ten. Ultimately, I think last week we discussed what would be a successful year for the Big Ten. Would you define this as such? And sure, I think you'd love another 1 or 2 programs somewhere in the 12 to 20 range in the final rankings of the college football playoff. What did Illinois finish, by the way? Brett Bielema was an advocate to have them in there. What did Illinois? Did you even look? I honestly didn't even look. What did Illinois finish? Hold on, I got it. They finished 20th.
Okay,
20th.
That's top 20
That's a good year.
That's
a good year. That's a good year. I think the Big Ten, though, ultimately needed a Michigan, a USC to win a few more games, Minnesota to win one more game, right, to be in that conversation. But to have 12 of your 18 teams bowling, to have 4 teams in the playoff, which is the most of any conference, ultimately you're going to be measured on how you do in the playoffs, how many teams get in, and how deep they go. So, yeah, I think it was a great year for the Big Ten. The Rate Bowl is Rutgers against Where is the Rate Bowl?
I believe, I have to double check. I believe it is at the Diamondbacks Stadium. I think it's still Chase Field. I think it went from the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. I think at one time it was a Cheez-It Bowl. I think now I got to triple check, but I'm pretty sure the Rate Bowl is in Phoenix, Arizona.
That'll be December
Not bad.
26th. USC, Texas A&M in the Las Vegas Bowl. Pinstripe Bowl is Nebraska, Boston College. Music City Bowl, Iowa and Missouri. Sun Bowl is Washington and Louisville. ReliaQuest Bowl is Michigan, Alabama, a rematch of last year's national semifinal. The Citrus Bowl, Illinois, South Carolina, and the Duke's Mayo Bowl, Minnesota, Virginia Tech. Illinois, South Carolina, Michigan, Alabama, Washington, Louisville, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, BC. Feels like USC, Texas A&M. A lot of good matchups. I mean, you don't have the Alamo Bowl where you have two conference teams playing in Colorado and BYU, which is absolutely asinine. But good matchups. I think the question with these bowl games now, the question is who's going to play, right? Like Michigan's got first round picks out the wazoo. So does Alabama.
Right.
They're not going to play. That's the thing. Bowls, still a great accomplishment. You shouldn't only be defined for some programs. Making a bowl is a reason to rush the field. So you shouldn't only be defined by reaching the college football playoff. But what these are games that ESPN creates for television revenue. And the bowls, to me, really do take a back seat now in a 12-team college football playoff.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more. With that said, though, I think if you look at, let's say, the Citrus Bowl, Illinois, South Carolina, you want to talk about big-time momentum for Brett Bielema on the recruiting trail and the transfer portal and just overall program health. If you can beat one of the hottest teams in the country down there in their territory, boy, you talk about a great win and a cap to what has been a great season. Yeah. That's one of the few non-playoff games you look at and say that's a really impactful game. And
even in games that fly under the national radar, like look what the bowl game did. And I know the year didn't end well for them, but look what the bowl game did for Miller Moss last year for USC.
Yeah, it's true.
Like it's little stories like that you look to come out of it.
No, you're 100% right. And that's why I'm excited to see even the Pinstripe Bowl in Nebraska, Boston College, right? Obviously, end the game on a sour note with how Nebraska lost to Iowa. But now, first bowl game since 2016, I expect a lot of red in the stands. I know Boston College is closer, but I expect a lot of red in Yankee Stadium. That should be a good game, a good atmosphere. We've seen Big Ten teams have success and have, some good showings in the Pinstripe Bowl. I'm excited. The only really disappointment trip is that the Big Ten is not featured in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, which I think right now, outside of the playoff, is by far the premium bowl game you have. It would have been great to see, Brett Bielema munching on a live Pop-Tart. But
did you see what the Pop-Tart Bowl did to market their matchup?
I saw they have 3 Pop-Tarts. I did not see any more marketing outside of that.
Oh man. Oh,
is it bad or good?
No, I'm gonna pull it up here. So the Pop-Tart Bowl is Iowa State and Miami. So they had someone go from their staff, put 2 Pop-Tarts in a toaster, and when they came back out, the logos were on the back of the Pop-Tart.
Okay.
But it wasn't done digitally. So friend of the podcast, Mickey Boylan, who's in marketing with Florida Citrus Sports, his job was to get the Pop-Tarts with the logos on the back. Now, I'm sure I can share this. So I was messaging with him last night. How did they do it? And he said there was a guy with a local shop that laser printed the logos on the back of these Pop-Tarts, and they had Pop-Tarts for all the potential schools that were gonna be in their game. They had like 6 different potential matchups, and he had to drive to the shop at 6 a.m., pick up all these Pop-Tarts, and now he's got a box of Pop-Tarts with all these different logos on it on his desk. But I thought when I watched the commercial, the little spoof they put out, that it was done digitally, but they actually had someone laser. You're not engraving it, but no,
you're engraving it
because because it's like you're just changing the color of it. I think you can still eat it, but my question, Pop-Tarts fall apart. Pop-Tarts are actually like the most unhealthy food you could possibly eat.
The most unhealthy, worse than like a burger or like like bacon. It's really that. I mean, it's not surprising, but it's to be number one is surprising. Wow. Interesting. Well, hopefully
Yeah.
Mickey did not have too many of those Pop-Tarts.
No.
You don't have to worry about a Big Ten team eating any of the Pop-Tarts. Interesting. Maybe Jerry Seinfeld would be there with this big Netflix Pop-Tart special. He's got to be like, the ceremonial coin toss.
I just did a Google here on Reddit, where you go for all accurate information these days.
Agreed. Yep.
Pop-Tarts have no nutrients. They're just loaded with garbage and sugar. They're all carbs that are quickly digested, and they have the fat content. It's high fructose corn syrup. Yeah, Pop-Tart. They're a dessert. They're not a breakfast.
For those parents listening out there, if you serve your kids Pop-Tarts in the morning, maybe time to reconsider. Look at us. We're just out here giving good advice.
I thought, to wrap the podcast up, you were going to bring it full circle and go, and Nebraska is playing Boston College in the Pinstripe Bowl in Yankee Stadium, where Juan Soto won't call home next year.
Formerly Juan Soto's home. What a time to be alive. Honestly, yesterday's one of truly the best days of my life. Penn State makes the playoff. Mets get Juan Soto. Can't beat it. Cannot beat it. Oh, actually, no, that's a lie. Yogi Roth can beat it. Very excited to talk to him tomorrow. So make sure you are subscribed to him wherever you get your pods, YouTube as well. Still Enrolled podcast. Check us out. Yogi will join us here to give us a really good breakdown, not to the playoff, but some bowl games and just overall conference thoughts as well. So if you're a fan of any of the 18 teams, I think this will be a good conversation for you to check out. So that will be coming on your feeds Tuesday morning. Look out for that. We'll be back on Thursday as well with some more playoff and bowl game breakdown, other conference storylines as well. So really, for us, this is the busy time is just getting started. We got a lot of chaos still to go, a lot of good games still to preview and break down here. So thank you for joining us here on the Still Enrolled pod. We'll talk to you Tuesday right here on the pod.